I'm Roberta Glass, and you're listening to my True Crime Report. My guest today, Mark Ebner, is a journalist and author currently residing in Los Angeles. A graduate of Bard College, Ebner has bravely been covering taboo topics for decades, from infiltrating Scientology to investigating Bill Cosby's rape accusations in 2007. Ebner's stories often reveal the kind of uncomfortable truths that get him in hot water, and with the passage of time, I told you so bragging rights. Welcome, Mark Ebner. You were one of the first people to break the story of Bill Cosby's serial raping and drugging of women in 2007. That story didn't really take hold until Hannibal Buress referenced it in his stand-up. What makes the difference between a story that's broken and largely ignored and a story that gets embedded in the public's consciousness?
I think that with Cosby, we kind of have to touch on elements of race and culture and celebrity to really understand what happened there. But actually, it was 2006 when I actually couldn't get any traction. I had 3 live on-the-record witnesses, yet nobody would even bite. Jump forward all the way to Hannibal Buress, and yes, there was some reporting. There was Philadelphia Magazine, a couple other more regional outlets were on it. I honestly believe that Bill Cosby was really hiding under the cover of his own celebrity. It's very simple, because if it takes Hannibal Buress, to get people to pay attention, including the media, then we have a serious problem. I was reaching out, I was trying to get the story out there, and nobody was biting, including wire services, which surprised me at the time. Now, why did Hannibal tip the scale? I honestly don't want to stereotype, but on the race issue, what happens a lot is, as you can see, you could say the same thing for R. Kelly. Why did this take so long? When we have had video proof of him abusing an underage woman, it really takes a dogged effort on the investigators' parts. But honest to God, I'll give you an analogy. Sometimes I play poker in Inglewood, California, and it's a predominantly black district in LA. And, you sit around a table and, you'll find 5 people at your table, who will go to their grave believing OJ is innocent of both crimes. The one he was, civilly judged against for, and the one that he just did 10 years for. Same with R. Kelly. I mean, up until just recently, I would say, that guy could sell out the Forum in LA and there would be hundreds of, sweaty, swooning women right up at the stage throwing their panties at him. What can I tell you?
Did you hear his most recent interview from prison, Bill Cosby's, where he said that this was sort of the white man's doing? Did you read that interview?
I didn't. I think I heard he was tweeting from prison, and a lot of people were surprised at that. But I can tell you from experience, going into prisons at the state and federal level to interview sources, that a cell phone is one of the easiest things to get inside. So that didn't really surprise me at all.
And what do you think about, someone else was remarking on him coming to court with a cane, sort of being led, and Harvey Weinstein, suddenly immobile. What happens to these rich, powerful men when they get to court that they have these visible physical ailments?
When you're guilty of sin, it's going in. It seems to me that the only thing that you can pull out of your ass, pardon my language, is a show trial. Where you bring in all the necessary props to try and garner sympathy from, a jury of allegedly your peers. It'll be interesting to see what happens in this, in the Weinstein case. I'm still not convinced that he's going to get convicted.
Yeah, one more thing on Bill Cosby. Tom Mesereau pulled out a witness, Margot Jackson, who said that she traveled with Andrea Constand, and Andrea Constand was going to talked about setting up a powerful man and that nothing had ever happened with Cosby and she was only doing it for the money. That was her testimony, which got, of course, destroyed on cross. I mean, is this a paid-for witness? Is this someone who just wants the attention of being involved in a high-profile trial?
Well, because I'm not quite sure about who you're talking about specifically, but given the nature of the way you just explained it, it could be a number of things. She could be a super fan. She could very well be paid. Remember, part of what inspired me to try and get the Cosby story out there when I did, when nobody was listening, I had the unfortunate experience of manning an editorial desk at American Media Incorporated. Now, that's the corporate entity for the tabloid, the National Enquirer, Globe, and, Star Magazine at the time. That was the big three under the American Media umbrella. And, he had managed to orchestrate a hands-off policy on him. So even in the world of scandal, Bill Cosby had protection for so many years. And I can say with absolute certainty that American media was covering for him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You met Mel Gibson at a party. He gave you a scoop about Harvey Weinstein. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I've been reprimanded for, putting this out on social media, but I think that at this, because it was something related to me at a private New Year's party by Mel Gibson. But given the context, I can only say, with a witness present, my wife beside me right there, I introduced myself. He gave my wife the old up and down. Then I got him back on track and I just said, hey, Mel, isn't it about time you did a book? And if you do, I'd like to be the one to write that book with you. I just find his character amazingly complex and his talent in overabundance. And I really believe that he should tell his life story at some point. And he was like, nah, I don't think so. But Ebner, if you want a story, I got a story for you. And I said, okay, shoot. And he said, Harvey Weinstein has no cock. And I was kind of blown across the room by that. Now you can imagine Mel Gibson is very much like his on-screen persona in person. He just sucks the air out of a room, exhales, and then blows the room out, And I was just, so I was intrigued. I leaned in and he said, yes, again, Harvey Weinstein has no cock. He's still, I don't know whether he used the word rape or sexually abuses, but he said he still rapes women. Could be paraphrasing here. He just uses his hands. And I said, well, what do you mean? I thought he was joking. And no, apparently he was dead serious. And he said, he went on to explain, going back to biblical times, of some gangrenous infection which had affected Harvey's nether regions to the point where, indeed, he has no cock. And I only put that out there because he was literally trying to tell me something about Harvey, and he was very graphic and very specific. I kind of kept it close to the vest until that woman, I can't even remember her name. I don't have the news report handy, but she was talking about actually Weinstein appearing intersex down there, having scars, which begs the question, what is the state of his physical anatomy and lack thereof at this point in his life? I just hope your listeners aren't about to have lunch, but there may well be a measure of truth to what Mel Gibson imparted to me that New Year's about 4 years ago.
Yeah, and you told it on your podcast, The Grey Zone.
The Grey Zone.
Yeah, and I was listening and I thought, well, Mel Gibson's kind of a drunk and says these wild things when he's drunk. But it's so weird. It's too weird not to come from somewhere. That was, my react. I was totally bewildered by it at the time, but it really stuck in the back of my mind. And so when I read that news story about the testimony in court, she also testified that he had no testicles. And so what is he doing going around asking women, do you like my big Jewish cock? Excuse my language, but, what is that delusion? Is that...
That's a good question because this is a funny conversation to have because we still haven't proven whether he has a cock or not. But I will say this clearly, wasn't purely a sexual thing for Harvey Weinstein. It was a power thing. So even if he did at some point lose his apparatus and his ability to perform in that way, he's, as mel-intoned, he's still abusing women. Also, there's the anecdotal story of him being across from a victim at, it was in Soho somewhere. I forget where it was, in some fancy hotel or a hotel restaurant down there, where he masturbated into a potted plant in front of her. So he was certainly working with something then. This could have been a fatal and progressive disease, And I say fatal because his fate is about to be decided in a court of law.
You've written about a wide variety of topics, from Scientology to dogfighting. Is there sort of a theme to any of the subjects that you write about?
I think that this goes back to the very beginnings of my career, where I, just started getting my bones probably about 1985. And I got a story published in Spin magazine. And it was a story of my own design. It was called Dying to Make a Living. And it was about actors and actresses who specialized in having their characters killed in horror films. And, here I am in Hollywood, just cutting my teeth, as it were, in entertainment journalism, for lack of a better oxymoron. And I realized, wow, I can just do and write about things that interest me. And when the opportunity arises, I can, as a freelancer, not beholden to any particular publication's edicts or mission statements. Sometimes a little bit of advocacy can seep through in, my investigations and things like that. So, journalism has been more than a career to me. It's been a way of life, more, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you wrote, I guess, what it would be really interesting expose of Scientology for Spy magazine.
Right. Do you want to buy a bridge? That story, I believe it was 1995, 1996, Spy magazine. Do you want to buy a bridge? It can be found somewhere buried on my website, www.hollywoodinterrupted.com. This is another case of just my curiosity and the fact that I had a wide berth to be able to pitch and get assigned stories out of my own interest. Basically, I was just, living in greater Los Angeles at the time for just over a decade. I knew there was something up with these legions of sailor-suited Scientologists wearing fake military garb with lanyards and everything else, and assigned, titles like commander and captain and this, that, and the other thing. This whole wacky naval ship that L. Ron Hubbard created. I wanted to find out something about it, but realizing that they were such a closed and cosseted cult, the only way to actually report accurately on this cult would be to do it from the inside out. So I joined the cult, and that's exactly what I did with the story. I exposed them from the inside out. And getting on the inside and then coming out, Hubbard had one of Hubbard's stupid sayings, which they love in Scientology, is the way out is the way through. Well, yeah, the way out is the way through the fucking door, Roberta. That's really the way it is, except, you can't underestimate the power of mind control. It's extremely popular. And, we're seeing that, playing out on a mass scale with Trump, if you want to get into that. But back to Scientology, bottom line is that I can only explain it as an evil, criminal mind control cult. And, fortunately, their membership is dwindling. They're buoyed only by the fact that they're real estate rich. And, they still have a fair measure of high profile celebrity, quote unquote, opinion leaders. But that's about it.
Why hasn't Scientology been shut down?
Because years ago, it seems to me that the only effective way to be able to completely shut Scientology down is for the government to reopen a thorough investigation of their finances throughout the year and to, be able to look into whether or not they actually do qualify as a 501c3 nonprofit. It's like any mob story. The Gov has to bring them down. And unfortunately, years back, decades back now, they cowed the Gov into silence. They shuddered them into silence by attacking, never defending, subterfuge, breaking into the IRS offices, look up Operation Snow White, and, harassing a government office with lawsuits to the point where the government actually gave up. And shame on them because, we've seen the wrongful deaths, the greed, the extortion, everything, the crimes that Scientology has committed in the decades since under the cover or under the guise of being religion, where nothing about their doctrine or the way they're set up amounts to anything more than a Ponzi scheme, let alone a religion.
Interesting. You also were the consultant for the South Park Trapped in the Closet episode.
I was.
What
Indeed.
What did you do for that episode?
Well, that was fun. What happened was I get a phone call out of the blue from one of the producers at South Park, who coincidentally was a friend of mine. She said, Mark, can you come down and talk to Matt and Trey? Well, I knew Matt and Trey because fortunately that same woman had invited me to their annual Halloween party every year and, other events that were South Park related. So I got to know them and we were aware of each other to the extent when they thought they wanted to go after Scientology on the show. I mean, because it was ripe for satire, especially, with the celebrities involved from Tom Cruise to John Travolta to Isaac Hayes, who ironically was a featured character on their own show. They said, well, we've done Islam, we've done Christianity, we've done vegans, we've done Prius owners. I guess it's time to go after Scientology. And they said, we better call Ebner. They had read my story. And I had also, I forgot to mention that Andrew Breitbart interviewed Matt and Trey as the quote-unquote tongue-in-cheek South Park Republicans for a little subchapter in our 2004 book, Hollywood Interrupted. So they had me come in and I got to see, the most exciting thing about that was being able to see how they put together a South Park episode. They sit down and they ask me to tell them the story about Scientology. Well, if you read Do You Want to Buy a Bridge? And then you see how that episode of Scientology plays out, leading up to the expose of all that science fiction horse shit in L. Ron Hubbard's doctrine, keywords, Lord Xenu, Planet Tejiak, the volcano exploding, engrams, all that kind of stuff, all that labyrinthian sci-fi horseshit tantamount to a bad episode of Star Trek. They were able to take our conversation, which they taped, and then they have a transcription printout of that. They have all their art. All the characters are stock, kind of cheesy, wonderfully cheesy animation. And they created their story during which, if you remember the episode, and anybody can watch it on YouTube, it's Trapped in the Closet episode of South Park. They can see that they were constantly poking Scientology by flashing on the screen this: volcanoes exploding, Lord Xenu, alien abduction. This is what Scientology actually believes. And to my knowledge, it was if not among the most watched episodes of South Park in their history. And, I was happy to consult on it. I basically just told them my experience from, going inside Scientology, and they just took elements of that and adapted that to their wonderful characters on South Park, and they made their magic.
Yeah, Tom Cruise seems to have totally gone all in with his Scientology. I hear he's moved down to Clearwater and is more involved than ever. What is it about his personality, do you think, that makes Scientology so appealing?
My experiences reporting on him or around him over the years, the guy he's angry, he's humorless, he has all the hallmarks of a cult drone. He's completely indoctrinated. So to say he's all in, he's not all in, out of necessarily religious zeal or anything other than the fact that he's been completely and thoroughly indoctrinated. And he believes, I should say, that anyone who's critical of his cult is radioactive, is PTS, which is Scientology jargon for potential trouble source. I mean, he actually believes that he has superhuman powers. He has control over MEST, M-E-S-T, matter, energy, space, and time. So in other words, he's a superhuman, but then going back to when I wrote the story, I was like, well, if he has all these powers, why couldn't you make a hit out of Far and Away, which had just bombed at the box office? There's no better way to elucidate the cult mindset than to, create a reflection of it in action.
The author of the big book on Scientology that there was a documentary on.
Let's see, there was...
the author writes for New Yorker.
There were a number of books.
The big one that came out that also was a document. Wright. Lawrence Wright, thank you.
Yes.
His point of that book was interesting. They made the point that basically the end result of Scientology, of going all the way in Scientology, is that you end up as crazy as L. Ron Hubbard did. You think that's true?
I think it's true because I think that at the end of this, and this is what is particularly tragic, is that you're either going to have a psychotic snap or, there's no way out, really, especially if you're a celebrity with secrets. Now, remember, everything about this cult is based on the confessional, which is auditing, which is the heart of L. Ron Hubbard's quote-unquote technology, which means to listen. Let's shift focus to John Travolta for a second here. They've got John Travolta, attached to an e-meter, which is basically a lie detector. And they have an auditor on the other side of that e-meter recording down all his thoughts and innermost secrets. So in essence, what they have is a dossier on every dick that John Travolta has sucked in the last 40 years. And imagine this. John Travolta, for all appearances, with his wife and family and everything else, presents himself as a heterosexual man to the public. And, Scientology would like to keep it that way. But mark my words, if Travolta, as valuable as he is to the cult, ever decided to leave Scientology, I guarantee you that they would take that dossier, which he signed out, over to them. I mean, this is dark, but you understand that not only are you sharing your innermost secrets and real life transgressions with Scientology, you're also assigning the rights over to them. They own your secrets. So it's an incredibly evil and deceptive plan. And it's quite effective to keep these people in the flock, because there's that very subtle threat that, they'll release all your private information, and they have done it in the past. So talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. You got a guy like John Travolta, and as conflicted as he may be sexually or whatever, can you imagine what kind of position he's in? They own his ass.
Do you think Scientology has influence culturally besides, just internally?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that once the floodgates opened, and I'll take credit for my part in that with the Do You Want to Buy a Bridge story, once the media picked up on the fact that Scientology just was out of gas. In other words, back when I was investigating them, they were arguably the most litigious cult of all of them. And, they had the legal team and resources to sue a publication like Spy Magazine out of existence. In the same way, a powerful celebrity like Tom Cruise would sue you for even thinking that he might be gay or something like that. In other words, remember, because Tom Cruise believes that he can read our minds, you see? So, funny thing happened on the way to declaring Tom Cruise heterosexual. Going back to Hollywood Interrupted, when we were about ready to submit our final manuscript to our publisher, I came up with a fun idea. I was like, hey, Breitbart, listen, let's do a select all and find out every time we mention Tom Cruise in the book. And it came up dozens of times, naturally, right? I mean, it was about Hollywood and the cult of celebrity. Well, if you go to Hollywood Interrupted, you'll notice that every time Tom Cruise is mentioned in that book, we added a replacement where we call him the heterosexual Tom Cruise. Sometimes multiple times in the same paragraph to make a point. So, I think that they don't have that power anymore because the secrets are out, and I think in many ways thanks goes to the early internet. I mean, going back to the early 90s, the news groups. I don't know if you've ever looked into their news groups like Alt Religion Scientology. And, the early warriors online who started leaking secrets, all their copyrighted, quote unquote, material, upper level stuff, OT3, the Wall of Fire, all these crazy things that your listeners are welcome to Google. And I encourage them to do as much to fully grasp, once again, the space alien nature of this wacky cult, concocted, by the megalomaniacal madman L. Ron Hubbard. I think with the secrets out, they don't, like I said, a dwindling membership. They don't really have much of a cultural imprint, except as an invitation for satire, if you will. So are they making a big impression on our culture? No, not anymore, except as the butt of a joke.
Interesting. I was wondering what you thought, because I read Hollywood Interrupted and I really liked it. And it had an unusual, an unusual tone in that, we're such a celebrity worshiping culture. It was really irreverent and critical, and also more kind of took a moral stance. I don't know if that's Breitbart. I always thought that was more Breitbart.
Yeah, I would say that all the moral outrage and indignation in that book, it came from Andrew Breitbart. However, we were living at a time where, a right-winger like Andrew Breitbart, would joke to me throughout the whole process of writing that book, Ebner, come on over to the dark side. No, I said, that's not how we started. The reason why this book works is because I'm the Venice Beach dwelling VW bus driving left-wing persona in this whole thing. And yet we can actually, and that was the beauty of our chemistry, was that we could put our political differences aside and still agree on the underlying thesis of the book. And that is, if you're a celebrity, please don't tell us who to vote for or who to pray to. I came into that project with a pretty hard skepticism about opinion leaders in general. And being in Hollywood in the trenches, reporting what a sick town Hollywood really is, it was easy for me to say, well, the culture of celebrity has way too much power and it's gone too far. And we could tongue-in-cheek diagnose celebrity as pundits, if you will, which is what Andrew Breitbart always wanted to be. And lo, he did succeed in that. We could meet on the same page with our mutual loathing for Hollywood and celebrity. And by declaring celebrity a disease, we could sort of stage a mock intervention, if you will. And that is exactly what we tried to do with Hollywood Interrupted. And, I'd say we succeeded to one degree or another.
Yeah, it has some of the best writing about River Phoenix and his background in the Children of God, or his parents' background in the Children of God cult, and thus his background. Did you watch Joaquin Phoenix's Oscar acceptance speech?
No, I skipped the Oscars this year. I heard a little bit about it. Did he find some words of tribute to his late brother River or not?
He did. He quoted River Phoenix's song lyrics, but he did a whole speech about, it was just every woke talking point in the history of the world. From gender inequality, which I don't even know what that word freaking means,
Right.
Because nobody wants to talk about women. That's so unhip,
Right.
And then he talked about the cows and milk from the cows is such, it's so terrible, and veganism. And it just reminded me of River Phoenix, who kind of hid his drug addiction behind his veganism.
Maybe, I kind of... it's coincidental, but I've been looking into Johnny Depp and the Viper Room and the history of the Viper Room recently, and I'm discovering a lot of things. Like, I don't know that he was all that much of a drug addict, for the simple fact that having my own experience, in the depths of personal drug addiction, I can say that we do know that he died from a combination of drugs. Those drugs were heroin and cocaine. Heroin and cocaine as delivered to him as a speedball, which means he was injected straight IV, with the fatal dose. I think his experience up with drugs up into that point probably didn't, steel him physically or mentally for the dose that he got that early morning in the Viper Room. It was basically a hot shot to him. In my circumstances, with the tolerance I had built up for drugs, I probably could have survived it and enjoyed it. Who knows? But what I'm saying is I'm not, shaming the memory of him, but I don't think he was the drug addict that people think he was. I think that he was literally, a curious, fiercely talented young man from a wacky upbringing with the having a cult in his background and everything else. But I think that when it came to that Viper Room thing, it was a tragic accident. And, I think in many ways, the guy or the person who delivered that fatal shot to him, interestingly enough, there's a wrongful death situation in there that was covered up. Because if you go back and you look at that particular investigation, I ask you, Roberta, what happened to the surveillance video in that place? It's not like he was miles away at an apartment, did a speedball, came to the club, and then overdosed there. No, if he was going to overdose and die, it would have taken as long as it took to shoot him up. And that means that fatal dose was delivered into his arm intravenously within minutes of his death. And I would like to see who was involved, and I have an inkling as to who I know may have been involved in purposely covering up the evidence of that.
Right, and there was a musician, I'm purposely not saying his name, but...
I will, John Frusciante.
Okay, right. Who left the country right after, at least left California right after it, is what I heard.
Hold on. I say John Frusciante. Am I accusing him of delivering the fatal shot to River Phoenix back then? No. But there is sourcing that kind of tries to point the finger his way. Does that make him a bad person? Hell no. That guy was in the depth of his own addiction at the time. But two addicts don't make anything more than, in this case, lethal and toxic relationship. It was bound to end this way in many ways. But once again, I want to be clear that I don't have a problem mentioning the musician's name, but I have no direct corroborated evidence into whether or not he definitively had a part in River Phoenix's death. But I will say this, the people that were directly involved, working under Depp, running that club, still to this day have a few questions to answer regarding what happened to evidentiary material, i.e. surveillance tapes. And I think I have an idea of what happened, but still working on that one.
Are you looking into Johnny Depp's partner who went missing, who sued him?
Yeah, Anthony Fox disappeared somewhere in Ventura County. That's a cold case. By the way, the investigation is still open in Ventura County into the disappearance of Anthony Fox. But, I've got reports from his own former wife who says she saw him in a supermarket up there. So he may still be alive. I doubt it. But if he is or he isn't, it still makes a great story. And, I have no answers, but I've definitely got my eye on that one too.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of criticism from West Memphis 3 supporters. I don't know if you know that case at all, because I believe they're twice convicted triple child killers. And Johnny Depp said that Damien Eccles, here's this triple child killer. He's walking the, red carpet with him and calling him his soul brother and getting matching tattoos. And now his PR team is releasing these tapes of Amber Heard and hashtagging these Twitter things of him as a victim and Amber Heard as an abuser. Did you listen to those tapes? And what do you think of that?
I didn't, but I can say that, this is to be expected by counsel on both sides. Understand, I know for a fact that Amber Heard's counsel, hired a notorious Hollywood fixer who I won't name at this point. You can probably figure it out. To go out and, opportune to dig up as much as dirt as they can on Johnny Depp to help make the case for Amber that he was abusive. Now, here's my take, in my opinion only, and I've met and interviewed Johnny Depp on more than one occasion. And, I will say that I don't believe that he's abusive any more than some alcoholic. We talked about Mel Gibson at the top, talk about him here. I can't really diagnose him as an alcoholic, but a guy who likes to imbibe, if you will, to the point where he may or may not have thrown a glass of wine against a wall or trashed a hotel room in a, fit of celebrity rock star panic or bravado. I'm sure he was, had a certain amount of rage and volatility in his relationships. But to be honest, I can't find any evidence of him ever laying a hand on a woman, including Amber Heard. And isn't that what this all rests on? Once again, I think that Johnny Depp is a victim of his own vices in this situation. And the reason why it's a big story is because there's big money at stake. And $50 million is the kind of money that could absolutely bury Johnny Depp at this point, should she prevail.
I'm skeptical of both sides because we're only seeing these sort of like small edited tapes being released. I don't know. I don't know these people, Yeah. I just think it's odd that people are so convinced that he's a victim, and taking up his cause based on his leaked audio tapes that he's obviously releasing to avoid paying up, So, yeah. You also defended for a short time Bryan Singer. What made you do that?
Well, I don't think I was defending him as much as I was. Now, this goes way back. This goes back to, and full disclosure, I know Brian. I've been on and off friendly with him throughout the years. We have a lot of people in common. So it is a little bit conflicting. But back in the 90s, when he was doing Apt Pupil, the long and short of that story and the entire thesis was, he was involved, he was on the receiving end of a vicious shakedown attempt by attorneys representing a lot of these Catholic school kids. You know, he had literally told his clients and their parents, who were claiming that, you know, they were being spied on. I mean, he was making a movie. They did have, you know, on-set protocols. Was it a good idea to shoot a shower scene with underage background talent? No, not in the least was that a good idea. What happened was that I met the lawyer for the plaintiffs against them. His name's Marty Rube. You know, basically he leaned over on the record. I have tape running. I'm interviewing him in the kitchen of his home. And he, you know, straight up told me that Bryan Singer was a pedophile. Well, I had no personal knowledge of that at the time. None of this stuff had, you know, come out of on him at that point. You know, we're going back to 95, 96, 97, 98, whenever Apt Pupil was being done. And I could see that he was putting visions of that this lawyer, Marty Rube, was putting, you know, telling these kids that by the time they turned 16, they'd have a Lamborghini or a Ferrari parked in their driveway once they got through with Bryan Singer. And I thought that's not really the way you go about trying to seek justice on clients that were allegedly abused. Because from all appearances and all on-set speculation, they weren't. So what I was doing was, and my story that came out in New Times that year was called Naked Shakedown. And in many ways, through that story and a deposition I had to do under oath, I stand by the story. That's it. Do I stand by Bryan Singer since? No. So do I defend him? No. But, you know, at the same time, he's one of those guys who's still walking around sucking free air, you know?
You know, you wrote this great piece called The Bagman about Eddie Murphy. And that just, I mean, talk about not picked up, you know, kind of slept on story. How did he get over that transsexual scandal?
He disappeared for the last 15 years or longer. You know, this is a case where I won't say as a result of the Bagman, you know, in my, you know, reporting, you know, around that whole fiasco he found himself in during the wee hours of the morning in West Hollywood with a known transgendered hooker in his car. Or should I say, I'm trying to remember if she was post-op or not. Yeah, I think she was. But, you know, regardless, he picked up a hooker and, you know, he went into classic denial. He could have saved himself and saved his career if he had just said, yeah, you know, I'm a perv. I like this kid, whatever. You know, I mean, Hugh Grant did it when
it worked, yeah.
By what's her name? With Divine Brown.
You're right.
You know, same situation. He went out right on Jay Leno's show, and Jay asked him, he said, man, what were you thinking? And, you know, Hugh Grant basically said, you know, he smiled and shrugged and said, you know, I'm an oaf. What can I say? You know, and he survived that without a blemish. Instead, Eddie Murphy claimed, I'm a good Samaritan. That's all I was doing. Well, your own home network, NBC Saturday Night Live, had a field day with that, where they did an entire segment on one of their most famous alumni, Eddie Murphy, called Eddie Murphy Good Samaritan. You know, I mean, so between the ridicule and the fallout and everything else, Eddie pretty much disappeared. And, you know, to his credit, he resurfaced in a grand style with a really amazing performance in Dolomite Is My Name, that movie that just came out, which I did happen to see and enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, me too. So is there any story that you regret writing, or do you feel like anyone you interviewed you felt fooled by?
I would say regret being published years ago. It's really hard to find, but I did a story naming names about the gay mafia in Hollywood way back for Spy Magazine. I didn't so much have a problem with quote unquote outing people in the context of that story. I felt like editorially, by the time the powers that be got done with my story, I felt that as the writer, I had to own, to a certain degree, coming off as homophobic to a certain degree in thesis. And I didn't like that because that's not who I am. And at the time that story came out, through Michelangelo Signorelli at Out Magazine, I basically made my amends, if you will, if anybody's feelings were hurt by that. So I do regret that story. It's just not that important. And it wasn't that important then to be outing people, whether or not they were powerful in Hollywood or not. So that would be one. And I suppose the only other one was I did a story about an actor named Peter Green. You'll remember him as Redfoot in Usual Suspects. He was the heavy in
very
the
familiar.
Mask.
Yes.
Yeah, he starred in Laws of Gravity in a searing, incredible performance. I mean, this guy has more talent than anyone I've ever met in Hollywood. I got hired to be his babysitter when I was writing for Premiere Magazine. A producer called me up and said, "Hey, Ebner, we're $250,000 deep in a Disney Touchstone film here in, I think it was Touchstone, one of the Disney labels up in Washington State. And one of our lead actors is strung out on drugs and we need someone up here." And I said, "I'm on my way." And what happened was that as soon as he met me, I disclosed, I said, "Listen, I'm here to get you to the set on time, and take care of your every need, my friend." And I pushed a carton of Marlboros across the table at him while he's looking at me thinking I'm a spy for the studio. I said, "No, I'm not a spy for the studio, but what I am is a journalist." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh yeah, let me see what you got." I had a woman taking care of my dogs back in Venice Beach. I called her up and I said, "Hey, grab these clips from my file, with some of my stories in them and fax them up to our hotel here." He read those clips overnight, and the next day he came up to me and he goes, "Oh, Ebner, man, I want to tell you my whole life story, the drug running, everything." And I was like, "All right." I said, "Here's the deal. Let's get you through this film and let's get you sober. Let's get you clean, and when you have, I think it was 30 or 90 days clean and sober, then I'll turn on the tape recorder. Until then, let's get you through this movie." And it was a fucking nightmare, Roberta, but we got him through it. And he got sober. And then he told me his story. And his story was incredibly dark and powerful. And it was published in Premiere Magazine as Career High, was the title of it. A hard story to find. I think I got some hard copies somewhere. But Peter Green was not prepared to see his life story jumping off the pages of Premiere Magazine as articulated by me. And he fucking flipped out. He wanted money from me. He wanted to break my legs, everything else, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't that I was scared of any retribution coming from him, but what it was that I felt like, who was I to dictate when he was able to tell his story, knowing what I knew about him? I am not God. You see what I'm saying? In other words, it was just so intensely deep and personal and horrific. And for any other actor who's not a survivor like Peter Green, it could have been a career ender doing that story. So I think there was a certain amount of persuasion and or, decision making on my part, which I should have given a little more weight to. Hey, is this guy really ready or not? So in many ways, I regret that story for the simple fact that I think it may have exacerbated his condition rather than working towards some sort of happy ending, because There was no happy ending, so to speak, in Career High for Premier Magazine, other than the fact that he was still above ground. And he still is. I have this theory that junkies like Peter Green, they don't die, they live forever. That's about it. Other than that, I don't regret much. In many ways, I regret my working for the tabloids, but I think I sort of made up for the year I spent at a desk at the National Enquirer with the fact that my experience there, to the top of our conversation, it actually spawned the raison d'etre for me exposing Bill Cosby when I tried to do it, and for one of my books that I'm most proud of, which would be 6 Degrees of Paris Hilton, Simon & Schuster, 20, whenever that came out. So yeah, I regret doing some tabloidish things because it's hard to take the high road when you're working for a tabloid. But on the other side of it, there was an embarrassment of riches for me as a result of my experience there. So I guess I would consider that a wash.
What has happened to Darnell Riley? And what is up with, trying to think, his Girls Gone Wild guy?
Joe Francis?
Yeah, why does he keep being blackmailed repeatedly?
Probably because karma has an interesting way of catching up with scumbags. It's probably as simple as that. With Joe Francis, Darnell Riley he got married. He wrote a book, and he's around. I ran into him out here a couple of times. To date, as far as I can tell, the guy's kept his nose clean, which is pretty impressive when you're talking about a guy who unfortunately committed his first double homicide at 14 years old. The fact that, a felon with a rap sheet such as the one he has, that he's been out for several years since publication of that book and has stayed out of trouble. I only wish him more of that, I suppose.
Mark Ebner, you've been really generous with your time and yourself, and I really appreciate you doing this interview. And thank you so much. And I really hope you come back.
We'll talk again, Roberta.
Okay,
Thanks
thank you.
a lot for having me on your podcast. Take care.
Okay, thank you.